Well, thanks everyone for inviting me to attend the meeting. My name is Hannele Savela. I'm the co-chair along with Lisa Loseiko of the SAON Committee on Observations and Networks. Thanks to Will for introducing SAON to you, and I will now continue telling a little bit more to you about this Committee on Networks and Observations. I'm sharing my screen now, so hopefully that would allow you to see my presentation. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it. And can everyone else make sure that they mute their microphones? We're getting a little bit of feedback. Thanks.
Okay, so the SAON Committee on Networks and Observations was established in 2014 together with the other SAON committee, the Arctic Data Committee. And we are kind of working as the practical tool to implement the SAON overall SAON goals and activities. And the objective would be to promote and facilitate international collaboration between different networks and observing platforms to achieve this pan-Arctic observational system. And as we see ourselves in the Committee of Observations at Networks is the home of the networks. And our aim is to provide information on the baseline Arctic observational assets. Secondly, we wish to facilitate collaboration of the different Arctic observing networks, for example, by identifying synergies or gaps or possible duplications between the different networks and observing platforms. Thirdly, we want to support the sustainability of different observational platforms among nations and organizations, importantly including indigenous peoples organizations and projects. And then we also want to help to improve in planning and collaboration of current and future observational systems. And how we are currently structured in the Committee of Observations and Networks is that we have a chairmanship consisting at the moment of myself and Lisa Loseiko. And of course, the SAON Secretariat is helping us in doing our activities. And we also have appointed representatives of the different SAON member countries from different participating organizations, Arctic Council permanent participants organizations, and different networks and projects. And we really find it important in the SAON Con that we have this inclusive approach, so that we warmly welcome all networks and projects who are interested or doing Arctic observing. Welcome to join the SAON Committee of Observations and Networks. And we wish to create collaboration and mutual and joint activities with them. And we are currently working on our work plan. And we have a work plan period that follows the 2-year Arctic Council chairmanship period. And we are now developing this work plan for the next 2 years, starting 2017, this year, and continuing until end of 2019. So this is the time that Finland is taking this Arctic Council chairmanship. And of course, the work plan is developed by ourselves at the SAON Con, and it's also accepted and given feedback by the SAON board. And the work plan that we have will consist of tasks and related activities, milestones and deliverables that can be measured and verified, and we hope to create and we are creating a very concrete work plan to demonstrate what we are doing and achieving, and we want to do a lot. And the work plan is currently divided into 4 tasks. The first one is support to SAON overall and general support to SAON board and executive committee. The second task is the policy support and inter-organizational collaboration. The third task is building capacity for observing networks and observations. And the fourth one is knowledge exchange across scales of observation. And a couple of words about these activities under each task that we currently have in the work plan. Under the first task, support to SAON, for example, one important aspect and activity is the inventory work. and defining requirements for different kinds of inventories, an inventory of these observational networks and projects and programs that we have already created in SAON. The second task about policy support and inter-organizational collaboration, for example, includes the EU PolarNet deliverable roadmap for optimization of monitoring and modeling programs. SAON is one partner in the EU PolarNet project, and this the deliverable is our responsibility in the project. Then we are actively contributing and participating the Geo-Cold Regions initiative, consisting of several different sub-activities with milestones and deliverables. Under task 3, building capacity for observing networks and observations, we are aiming to creating best practices for SAON networks, best practice for national SAON offices, the one that we already exist. Of course, provides the best practice at the moment, the US SAON office, and we hope to have some new national offices later on, building on these good and best practices. Then under task 4, knowledge exchange across scales of observations, we are, for example, going to organize a joint breakout session at Arctic Circle later this year. And this was just accepted. I just heard about it today. And it will be a joint session with European Polar Board, Geo-Cold Regions Initiative, and GEO in general, and Indigenous Peoples Organization. And then other additional activities are currently being developed and added under different tasks of the work plan. What about the most current and recent things we've been doing in SAONCon is that we've been finalizing our terms of reference. So we are really strongly structuring and kind of reformatting our structure and activities in SAONCon. I think we have made really great progress lately during this year. We are also going to finalize the work plan. We have the latest draft available, and it's going to be discussed, and we are going to be given feedback by the board after the strategy retreat in the end of June. And then, of course, we are participating and contributing to the development of the new SAON strategy. And we are having teleconferences every other month, with the exception of the summer field season time. And of course, additional meetings if required by certain tasks or activities. And then we are arranging face-to-face meetings during the Arctic Observing Summit that is hosted by SAON and International Arctic Science Committee, and additional face-to-face meetings may be proposed if needed, back-to-back with major scientific conferences and so on. So with these words, I want to warmly welcome all of you who are interested to work with the SAONCon, the home of the networks, and below you can find my contact information, the contact information of Liza Lofeto, my co-chair, and Jan Daniel Larsen from the SAON Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so are we ready to move on to Peter for your Arctic Data Committee? So we can take questions and have a discussion at the end of this session.
And I can come in and say, here are the known programs.
Great, thank you very much. My name's Peter Pulsper. I am chair of what is actually a joint committee. And so it is the AOSST SAON. So AOSST is the International Arctic Science Committee. SAON, of course, is the Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks. The reason why we're a joint committee is at the same time the SAON committee was formed in 2014, AOSST was looking at forming a similar committee, and we all agreed that it was much more efficient to do this together. So I'm going to go through just a very high-level overview of a little bit about what the data committee is, what we've been up to most recently, and are planning to do, and then I'll end, I think, with a bit of editorial as well, just to, I hope, complement what Will has said. So as was mentioned, we were formed in November of 2014. We had our first meeting in Potsdam, Germany, and that's where we decided to make it a joint committee. It is committee of nationally appointed representatives as well as organizationally appointed representatives. So for example, we have representatives from WMO, GCW, we have representatives from the Geocold Regions Initiative, etc. We also, in our first initial charter that we established, is rather than keeping it a closed committee, we agreed that we wanted to engage any interested and engaged parties. So we have a number of individuals or organizations who participate because they're interested and they want to contribute and also want to gain from interacting on a broader scale. And some of those members are actually are quite productive, even though they're not sort of officially mandated to attend. As of this year, we're working to establish at least 2 representatives from Indigenous organizations that are funded to attend. We started that process at a workshop I'll talk about later in the presentation, but we feel that's quite critical to ensure that we have Indigenous perspectives as well as they have the means to actually participate. So I won't go through the entire work plan or the entire sort of terms of reference, but generally what we're looking to do is to provide some insights into the data system. So actually understanding what is quite a complex system of data repositories and so on. We're looking at effectively promoting data policy, establishing data policy where needed, but I think for the most part, that is actually promoting existing data policy, making people aware of it and so on. Not developing infrastructure, but understanding infrastructure needs and promoting this idea of infrastructure thinking. So rather than establishing, data systems that have a 2 or 3 year lifespan and then go off into the data graveyard, how can we ensure that those things are taken on by a repository that does have a long-term mandate, or how do we ensure that these smaller projects can continue to operate? So that's the infrastructure aspect of it. We look at promoting this idea of ethically open access. So this is the idea of open data, but recognizing that there are some situations where for ethical reasons, the data cannot be open or at least fully open. And that includes social science, some Indigenous knowledge, some sensitive data, and so on. Things like promoting attribution models, citing data, making sure that people are aware of actually who created it so that they can get credit and so on, which is part of providing actually a value proposition for improved data management. And then a big part, I think, the conversation is the idea of standards and interoperability, allowing different systems globally to work together and to operate together, knowing that we do not have a centralized system, and we probably will never have a centralized system, just given the needs of different members of the community as well as different funding bodies and so on. In terms of some of the activities we've been involved in recently, I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly, but feel free to come back with any questions that you have. So early on in 2016, we were looking at a follow-up to the second Polar Data Forum, which brought together about 110 people in Waterloo, Canada, and that was co-sponsored by NSF and others. We presented last year at the Arctic Science Summit Week in Fairbanks. I did a keynote talk on data and the work that we're doing, contributing to things like the Arctic Observing Statement, which included a data component. We worked actually with IARPC, this group, to organize a town hall meeting in Fairbanks and bring together various actors to discuss various data-related issues. And in that, at that meeting, we confirmed the importance of interoperability and started a plan for a workshop that we held later in the year. This just shows you the Arctic Observing Summit conference statement. So it talks about here working through the AOSST SAON Arctic Data Committee to develop a broad globally connected system, so on. We did some work in just trying to bring together community members at International Data Week, which was a major event held in Denver with over 1,000 people attending, not just looking at Arctic data, but looking at data writ large. And this is something we're really sort of working on right now, is making sure that we don't put ourselves into a small sort of Arctic or Antarctic data silo, knowing that these issues are actual global issues that are being worked on by many people in the world. towards the end of last year, late in 2016, we held a workshop in Frascati, Italy. And this was actually coordinated, or at least we started as the lead organization. We brought many other organizations to the table, including some that are more Antarctic focused, but others that have been mentioned already, EU PolarNet, for example, WMO, Europolar Prediction, and so on. So in that meeting, we talked a lot about this idea of interoperability and how we can actually better share data in a seamless way. You know, what are the issues? What are the challenges that we have there? So between in-person and online folks, we had about 60 people involved in that. We're working up the report. We should have an initial draft for the meeting next week, and then we're looking at having sort of a more polished published draft in the summer of this year. One of, I think, the really important issues or items that came up in that meeting, I think, touches on what Will was talking about with his introduction, is, you know, the main challenges today that we saw as a group was that they're social and organizational rather than technical. And the idea is that we have a lot of technology, we have a lot of standards, et cetera. Where we're lacking is in the coordination, the ability to sort of bring it all together at a global level. So we're doing a number of things to try and work towards that. So we have one initiative called Mapping the Arctic Data Ecosystem. We now have a funded postdoc who is actually looking at trying to sort of map out the various different individual, you know, data centers, major aggregation sort of bodies, standards, and so on, so that we can do a better job of trying to see how we could tie those things together through policy, through funding, and so on. We have some other initiatives that are particular focused initiatives that relate to interoperability. One of them is the Metadata Elements Project. So there we're trying to identify different ways that we can connect the discovery of data. We have many different catalogs and so on, but they're not all talking together. So Canada is leading on that. We're working closely with the Geo and Geocold Regions Initiative on that. And what we're trying to do there is say, you know, before we can even think about how you connect the data, you have to think about how you connect the discovery of those data. There's some work on education and training, which we think is foundational to ensure sort of our next generation of researchers, as well as current generation, actually can learn more about data management, and how we can move forward at a global level. So we're working with Association of Polar Early Career Scientists on a series of webinars that will take place starting late this year and into next year. And then a fundamental issue that we've identified again and again, which is, it's one thing to share a data file, it's another thing to be able to use and understand those data. And so we have a new group forming that is going to be looking at vocabularies and semantics of data. And so that's going to be a partnership actually between Arctic Data Committee and IARPC. And we have a number of different folks who are working in that area are going to get together and start working to coordinate. Just in terms of where we're going this year and next, we've got the Arctic Data Ecosystem Initiative, which is now funded and going to be moving forward. We have the follow-up on the interoperability workshop, and from that, what we're looking to do is sort of set out a bit of a map or a plan to say, okay, these at least are the big issues that we talked about and the opportunities. You know, how can we use that maybe to move us forward? We're going to be working with all kinds of different partners on things like promoting data publication. There's some new data journals and so on. And I think the biggest, most important thing for me is this idea of network building, and this organizational and social component is, how do we bring together different bodies that are working in this area? Even a few years ago, there were not that many initiatives that were playing in this space in a big way. There were certainly always, you know, data centers, et cetera, but now we have large coordinating initiatives like Geocold Regions, the WMO, the Antaros project that Will mentioned, IARPC itself, GeoCRI's duplicated there. There's a new Canadian network that met 2 weeks ago where about 70 people got together and are talking about developing a national initiative there, and so on and so on. So we have a meeting coming up in September of 2017, and we're really focusing on having at least the key sort of actors in this space around the table there, or at least, you know, connecting virtually, so that we can start to look at the various work plans, et cetera, that are in place and coordinate so that we're being as efficient as possible and also understanding gaps where there may not actually be resources in place already. One sort of, this is my start of my editorial, I think one of the challenges with SAON over the years, although I've only been involved for a short period of time, I know people who were involved right from the beginning, is that SAON is often seen as Will has termed it, as a they rather than a we. So people sort of look at SAON as this external body that is aiming to do this and that. If you look at the history of it, what the intention was to be actually a collection of particularly national initiatives that would work together to try and build this international system. So I don't think it's there yet, but if we're going to get there, it has to be more of a we. And so on the data side, we're going to really be trying to work on getting this we together and say, okay, we do actually have some resources in place. How can we best utilize those? So that's going to be our push really in towards the end of 2017, and we're really positive that we can get some good traction there. To Will's comment too about other initiatives maybe being a better home for this, I definitely see some advantages of that, particularly given that some of these other initiatives like USAON and like EU PolarNet have resources. My understanding of the historical challenge there is that many of these are projects, not programs. So EU PolarNet, for example, will cease to exist in a couple of years, or at least in its current funding level. And also, most nations around the table, I think at the beginning of these discussions, did not want to take this on for the world. They have their own national sort of objectives and priorities. And so for them to say, well, great, USAON or the Canadian, Polar Knowledge Canada or other bodies are going to take this on sort of ad infinitum for the world, most people step back from that. The idea of SAON was, could they create a persistent body that could take it on over the long term, regardless of whether, projects come and go type thing. So a big challenge, and certainly one that SAON is still has yet to meet. But that's where I think we stand on both the observing and the data side of things. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. And our last presentation is going to be by another Peter Schlosser, on the Arctic Observing Summit. So Peter, are you ready?
Yep. I am. So I guess I have to share the screen, right?
Yes.
No, I have.
There we go. We can see your screen.
Yep. Okay. So I will talk a little bit about the Arctic Observing Summit. And actually, Will's comments sort of feed into the creation or the origin of the Arctic Observing Summit. And Peter also commented a bit on what I wanted to say as a at the beginning of this presentation. SAON in essence was mandated. It was created as a mandate by the Arctic Council, I think, in a way, through AMAP and IASST. And at a time when this was done, a lot of active scientists in the community sort of really felt this is the day, as Peter said it, and some people said, who are they coming along trying to organize our observations? So there was a big polarization between the formal structure of SAON and the community that really did the work. And that sort of lasted for quite a few years at the beginning of the SAON, of establishing SAON. I think we actually have overcome that, and we are at a point where the community, in my view, is ready to engage and make SAON something that really is workable and can have an impact, and also helps the community to, in their own efforts, for a larger context of the work that they are doing as PIs or as projects of multiple PIs, etc. So now to the Arctic Observing Summit. At the time when SAON was established, quite a few members of the Arctic environmental change programs had the idea that we actually need a platform to exchange about how the observing component of these programs can be synchronized, can be strengthened, can be coordinated, and how can we actually think about moving towards pan-Arctic coverage, knowing that this is a major challenge. So while we were thinking about that and how we could establish such a platform, SAON put out a call for so-called tasks, specific activities under the umbrella of SAON that would be, in accordance with their mission. So we proposed to have the Arctic Observing Summit as a task of SAON. And that was proposed, accepted, and that's how this Arctic Observing Summit came along. So let me see if I can forward these things. So what you can see here is, yeah, it is a SAON task. It is a biannual gathering and a workspace and forum. The goal is to design, the implementation, coordination, and sustained operation of an international pan-Arctic observing system. And if we are looking at that, we realize that this has to be a network, and let's say a system of systems, to use a common phrase. It was envisioned as being comprehensive, meaning going across the different disciplines, not just ocean, atmosphere, or the social domain. It should have a component that's community-driven and would be guided by the best science we can come up with. The planning and development is led by a group of entities, including ISAC, the International Study of Arctic Change, SAON, of course, itself, AOSST, and others. So going through these things, these components, the platform, of course, we felt is needed to address urgent and broadly recognized needs of Arctic observing across all components of the Arctic system. This is this cross multidisciplinary approach. The forum would be used to optimize resource allocation, minimizing gaps and avoiding duplication. I think we are more in the danger of having gaps than duplication, but anyway. And it also was meant as an active workspace to develop solutions, recommendations, make tangible contributions for operation. And here in that very simplified picture on the right, you can see that it's meant to have several components, not just a scientific observing network, but also reaching into the stakeholders and the decision maker domains. So the main goals are to provide a community-driven, science-based guidance for the design, implementation, coordination, and then importantly, sustained long-term, and here we put decades in parentheses, operation of an international network of Arctic observing systems, and importantly, that serves a wide spectrum of needs, science and beyond. And to create a forum for coordination, exchange between researchers, stakeholders, funding agencies for resource allocation involved in such long-term observing activities. The objectives, products, and audience are to engage academia, government agencies, other Arctic stakeholders, to assess the scientific basis for the Arctic observing activities, synthesize network design options and observing priorities into recommendations, and especially that design of the system is really a tough problem that we are continuously struggling with, but it is something that we have to stay on that task to really figure out at some point how to do that, identify network issues that require general attention but also SAON attention. They are now held biannually together with the Arctic Science Summit Week. SAON task I already said. The first one was out of cycle with the ASSWs. It was 2013 in Vancouver. Then we synced with the ASSWs 2014 and 16, Helsinki and Fairbanks. And the upcoming fourth will be in conjunction with the Polar 2018 meeting in Davos, Switzerland. Just to give you a sense of what kind of themes, and there's a lot of text in there, don't try to read all of that. There is actually from left to right, the Fairbanks, the Helsinki, and the Vancouver Arctic Observing Summit themes. And a lot of them have to do with issues that are coming back, like international and national strategies for sustained support of long-term Arctic observing. That's something clearly, this needs an international approach, so we are going after that. Also, what is coming back is technology and innovation. What is the progress between these observing summits? Is there something that is becoming ready that we can jump on? Actor and stakeholder engagement and needs is there in all of them. Then more recently, we put more emphasis on Arctic observations in the context of global observing initiatives, and of course, interfacing indigenous knowledge, community-based monitoring, and scientific methods is something that is there throughout, but is becoming more visible. Don't try to read any of the thing. This is just sort of on the top. You have these 3 bullets here. What are examples of outcomes? There are white papers, recommendations, conference statements, and here you can see actually in that box the recommendations from the AOSST 2016. I just want to highlight there are about 7 of them, so it's it's not too many, not too few. Peter already referred to one of them about the data. Here on the lower right, you see one of the special volumes that came out of the 2013 AOSST. We have another one under preparation that is coming out of the 2016. So every second, meaning every 4 years or so, we try to capture input from the community by having a widely based call for 3 levels: short comments, sort of longer comments, and fully fledged manuscripts for papers on all aspects of observing, and they are then reviewed and collected in a special issue. Here's another example of the AOSST 16 Fairbanks outcomes. The AOSST did actually, looking for some umbrella, identify that SAON, in principle, is the appropriate entity for coordination and implementation of this integrated Arctic observing system. And that brings me back to Will's comment at the beginning. I think Frascati is a deciding moment in the history of SAON. There is now a lot of willingness, there's a lot of support to make that work, but something has to happen to put that into a framework that can be described, that can be documented, and can be implemented. So then other topics, and I just go to the second, I don't want to read through all of them, is that we need to make what is here called, in quotation mark, the business case of an observing system. And that actually then is going into the major theme, the bullet 3 here on the next slide, for the AOSST 2018. And we are presently working on how to actually structure that so that we can get a good product out of that AOSST on that particular topic. There will be other topics, other themes in addition to that, but that might develop based on the present discussions. That's the central one. The organizing committee is not, I just see that this list that was given to me is not complete. Peter Pulsifer is on that too, and there are 1 or 2 other people missing. There are typically 3 co-chairs, 2 are still to be confirmed. 1 is from ISAC, 1 from SAON, and 1 is typically from the host, is from IASC. And this time we are still sort of looking at confirming the final configuration, but that will be done pretty soon. The event will take place between 24 and 26 of June in Davos at the end of the Polar 18 conference. And these are just some perspectives that I think you all know, so I can actually skip them. So with that, I would like to end that, and just one final comment. Since we had organized the first summit, we actually have formed a community that seemed to follow these summits. There is sort of a core that comes back, and it's easier now to build on what has been done before. the number of participants is anywhere between 200 and 500 people. So it is actually a fairly large community that participates. And I think we are working on getting the diversity of the participants, you know, better established, so that it's not just scientists talking to scientists, because that is not the real goal. I mean, that's part of it, but we also have to reach out to others who are using the observations, who have input in what is their problem, what should be observed, and also people who have to make that work resource-wise. So we are trying hard each time to get a diverse audience to actually being able to meaningfully address these topics. And with that, I will close my remarks.